start the recording. And I'm not going to do a lot of intro, which I haven't done for any of our speakers. I did a little more with Krissa because I know Krissa personally, but I always feel like when I speak to journalism students or introduce someone to journalism students, I shouldn't have to give any intro because you should have done your homework and you should know as much about the person as I do almost. So we do have with us today Erin Ailworth, and Erin is the Midwest correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. And you know, when I looked up her byline in the Wall Street Journal site, I laughed because it says, well, actually, I think this I got just from your Twitter. It says also known as Calamity Erin. And I just thought that was like hilarious to be known as Calamity anything. But then when I started looking through your bylines, I saw why you have that nickname, because she has covered just about every major catastrophe that has hit not just the Midwest, but really around the country. And she has just done amazing work from the front lines. And so she spoke to the group last year, and I heard so much about it that I, immediately knew that I wanted to have her come back and speak this year. And so Erin, in addition to covering calamities and disasters, also covered the energy sector for many years, 10 years. She worked at the Boston Globe, the Orlando Sentinel, and she has now been with the Journal for how long, Erin? 6 years or so?
Since 2014, so
okay, yeah,
coming up on 7 in October.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin. And Kate, do you have your hand up, or were you just responding to the? Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and we're just going to have a discussion with her about the amazing work she does and how she does it.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Good. So I guess as I was telling Shirley, a lot of this presentation goes a lot like my beat, which is a little bit fly by the seat of your pants. So really, I want to start talking about covering the disaster beat by asking all of you, first of all, and if you want to put your answers in the chat, please do. I've got it open so I'll be able to see, or if you have questions, put them in the chat, or somehow signal me. Otherwise, I can't see everyone. But I want to ask, how many of you have at some point covered some sort of disaster story? And this can be anything from like a natural disaster like a storm or a wildfire, a hurricane if you live in Florida or along the Gulf Coast, to something like, God forbid, a mass shooting, or even protests and riots get put into the disaster bucket. So who has any sort of experience with this type of reporting? All right, a decent number of you. What kind of stuff have you done? I think that'll give me a starting point. Just jump in.
I covered the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening around campus.
Yeah, same. I've covered them in how they affected campus as well as like the downtown Chicago area.
Yeah, I did that too, and I actually didn't realize it counted as a disaster reporting until you just said that. So that's very interesting.
Kind of trauma related, because you're talking oftentimes about trauma that has been perpetrated on people. That's why people are protesting, right?
Yeah. I've covered as well the Stop the Steal protest. A lot of, especially after the Gold Spa shooting, I've covered a lot of like rallies around that. I've covered fires in Detroit, so that's kind of what I've done.
Yeah, you guys have a lot of experience. Oh my gosh, the Texas freeze. I actually have I have a little bit of I guess I wouldn't call it survivor's guilt, but like I used to live in Houston, so I sort of felt like I should have been there for the Texas freeze and was not. So I mean, gosh, you guys, look at your experience. It's mass shootings, it's the floor breaking during a concert. I had one of those where a floor broke at a frat party. The protests, I saw a tornado in here. Robbery, oh my God, you guys like everything. Okay, so the BLM protests. So how did you ask for these assignments, or did you just get thrown into them? Both. Yeah. So I actually asked for this assignment, and that's because the universe used to throw me into them whether I wanted to be in a disaster or not. And so I think for those of you who haven't yet covered some sort of disaster or trauma event, if you stay in journalism long enough, you will, simply because it's part of the regular news cycle, right? And so what I really like to talk about is how you deal with this type of reporting, because I think so many of you have done this that you probably know it's not quite like anything you do in the rest of the newsroom, right? It's not quite like covering city council. It's not like covering the school board. It's not like covering a business or talking to CEOs in their offices. You are out on the ground. You are talking to people who are often traumatized, who may have been through something harrowing, possibly lost a loved one. And even if it's not a sort of action moment, if you're just coming in and you're attending a rally or protest, or you're coming in after the fact, you're dealing with people whose emotions are high, right? And who have probably something important to share, but may not be ready to share it with you. And so I'm going to ask you a question. When these assignments come your way, what's the first thing you ask yourself?
I can go. For me, the first thing that I ask myself is like, why me? And also that's probably the first question that comes to my head.
Anybody else?
When I get assigned these types of stories, I often think, okay, now what will happen right after this? Like it already happened. What's going to happen next?
Yeah. So my very first question every single time is along those same lines. It's the very first question you need to ask yourself is, should this be my assignment? Do I feel like I am the person that should go? Now, this is usually a quick moment. Like it shouldn't take you too long to answer that question. And the reason that I say this should often be the first question is because the answer will determine, will determine how well you're able to do this job. Disaster coverage is not everybody's jam, just like covering a city council is not everybody's jam. I was an energy reporter for 10 years. I was good at it, but you know what? My colleague Russell Gold, he is great at it. And that's because energy is his jam. Like total geek, has written two books. And like he lives and breathes everything energy. I live and breathe everything disaster. So the reason that I say you should often start with the question of, should this be my assignment, is because if it's not your jam, that's okay. And you're still needed in other parts of the newsroom. But so your first question should always be, should this be my assignment? Do I want to do this type of work? Because you really need to want to do it, because it's dangerous. It's emotional, and it just drains you, because you are talking to people who are probably having like either the worst moment of their life or asking really tough questions that they are trying to slog through and trying to change institutions. I mean, think about the George Floyd protest, right? And the emotion that came out of it. And sometimes that became anger, and that became, burning things and breaking windows and chaos and rioting. And you've got to figure out how to tell that story, right? So I kind of wish I was in the middle of a disaster right now. It's much easier, as Bradley knows, to like make this point when I'm wandering through a disaster zone. Sadly, that is not happening today. Well, I shouldn't say sadly. It's a good thing disaster is not happening today. But what are the challenges of this type of work that you guys have encountered? I just want to talk, basically today I want to talk you through and learn from your experiences and have you learn from mine. So feel free to ask me questions, but tell me some of the challenges that you have encountered, and maybe we'll talk through how you address them in the reporting challenge, in that reporting moment.
I can go. So for me, I think the biggest challenge is just making sure that I'm asking questions and like also, yeah, basically what Jada said, like showing sympathy as I'm asking the questions, not just trying to seem like I'm, using people just for the story, like trying to make sure that I'm also caring about what they're going through and making them know that I like sympathize with them.
Let me ask you, how do you do that? Empathy in reporting is really, really important in this work, and not everyone recognizes that immediately. Do you do anything specific when you are trying to make that connection and put people at ease and make sure that you are being sensitive?
Yeah, so I think under normal circumstances, I guess like not COVID, I always try to like have the conversation in person. I think that's been the hardest part of like, remote, just not, the message doesn't always get across when you're not in person. For me, the kind of disaster reporting that I've done is the Texas freeze, and a lot of people lost power. So the girl who I interviewed, who was a student, was like not able to actually like Zoom or FaceTime or anything like that. So I had to just be like DMing her. But I told her like, I'm sorry about what's happening and keep me updated with your situation, and just like listening to her and making sure that I'm telling her story and like making it known like what people who are also in her situation are going through.
I like this starting point, because what you're talking about is something that I like calling not going in hot. In this type of reporting, you can't be the sort of bulldog reporter that you might if you were going in to interview a CEO, right? You're not going in to have a combative interview. You are pulling back. You're using that soft voice. If you're in person, maybe you're leaving your notepad in your pocket, or your camera is down, or your recorder is put away, and you're starting a conversation first. And I do a little bit of talking without taking notes at first, and then I ask permission. Permission is really, really important when you are talking to anyone in a disaster or trauma type situation. It's about consent and making sure that one, they're in a frame of mind to talk to you, but that they're also comfortable enough to open up to get at their real emotion. And what asking for permission does, asking for consent does, is it gives them back some of this control that they've had ripped away. I mean, think about losing your home in a hurricane or a wildfire. Like, in the California wildfires, the big one, well, the last big one that I covered, the fire it burned at a rate of a football field a second. You don't really outrun that. So if you get stuck in it, like super, super traumatic if you end up surviving, right? So then think about coming and talking to someone who has just lost their possessions, who has lost maybe a loved one, who has been surrounded by these flames. They had no control in that moment. By asking their permission, by getting their permission, you're giving them back control. And then I constantly tell them, like, listen, this is a conversation. It's a give and take. I can ask you a question. You don't have to answer it. And if you think I'm not asking the right questions, please feel free to guide me. And if you need time, like, take time. These conversations often unfold at a slower pace than other ones. But by telling people, like, hey, listen, we are talking, that means you have as much control over this dialogue as I do. And if there's something that you want to say, you should say it. And if there's something that you don't want to say, please just tell me. And you might think, oh, but then they're not going to tell you everything you need to know. But it has the opposite effect. By telling them that they have, agency in this moment, it actually allows people to open up more. And I really like this question that's in the chat. How do you draw the line between what is appropriate to report and pushing someone's boundaries to get their story? Listen, this will come with experience. It's not something that you are going to get perfect immediately or even all of the time. Sometimes I push a little too hard too, but you learn how to read people's body language. You learn how to read their voices and their reactions. And sometimes you walk away. That's the thing about disaster and trauma reporting, is sometimes you just have to walk away. You have to know that okay, this person didn't talk to you, but somebody else is going to, and that's okay. You will get something. It's really hard to be in a disaster zone and just totally flame out. Like, you've got your own observations, first of all. What do you think the most important tool I take into a disaster zone is?
Camera?
I'll give you a hint. Everybody has one. Tissue. I like that. I should take tissue. Heart's a good answer. Bingo. In fact, I have two of them. No, do you know why? It's not my notepad. Any guesses as to why? No, why the phone versus anything else? I mean, you should take a notepad too, but if I have nothing else, I want one of these.
I mean, it has everything you need. I mean, it can be a notebook, it can be a recorder, it can be a camera. You can tweet, anything.
Tweeting in a disaster zone, actually, tweeting is really tough. So I take it because it's fast and it's everything. I mean, I have a notepad as a backup, but this is my notepad. I can flip it real quick and turn on a recorder. I can take video, and oftentimes I don't take written notes anymore. I do occasionally. It depends on the person's comfort level most of the time, but imagine being in a protest that has suddenly turned dangerous into a riot. Things are moving real fast. Police are lobbing crap all over the place. Protesters are lobbing stuff back, like something may be burning over here, something may be smoking over here. you are not going to see everything, but your video is going to catch a bunch of stuff that you don't initially see. So if you take your phone real quick and turn on, just turn on your video, you're suddenly going to get what people are saying, what it sounds like. You're going to get a visual of what it feels like that you can then go back to later and mine for extra details that you might not have noticed on first blush. I have lots of videos, little video snippets that I tweet or post to Instagram later that show this. During the initial days after George Floyd's death, there were lots of protests that became unsafe later at night, and police got really aggressive at how they sort of tamped down on that. And there was one night where they came out with basically tear gas all over the place, and I had video, and it wasn't until I went back to look at the video that I noticed that they had these really, like, they looked like fire extinguishers, and they were mobile tear gas canisters. They were just like spraying at the crowd, high pressure. And we were able to put that detail in a story. How do you make sure you're safe in those situations? So we've got this really amazing team of people in what we call GSOC, which is our Global Security Operations Center. And there's a guy there, his name's Steve-O Stevens, and he is amazing. And he basically I think he's put every reporter through protest training. And what you really have to learn is situational awareness. So here's the other lesson that I really like to share on disaster and trauma reporting. Everybody here sounds like they're already a pretty darn good journalist. You need to be more than just a good journalist to do this work. You need to be a good planner, a good prepper, good at logistics, good at thinking on your feet for when, excuse my language, the shit hits the fan. Because it always hits the fan. There is never a time that plan A always works. So you go to plan B, plan C, plan D. And you've got to know in advance at least a little bit of what you're walking into. And so that's what Steve-O helps with. He teaches us when you go into, for instance, a protest, even if it looks peaceful, even if it's during the daytime, it's not at night yet, you don't want to be in the middle of the crowd. You want to be on the edge of the crowd. Why? Anybody got a guess? Why do you want to be at the edge of the crowd?
So you can get out if something happens, or if
Ding,
something
ding, ding.
yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. If people start running and you're in the middle of it, like, what happens if you fall down? Trample, no good. If you're out of commission, who's doing the reporting? So you stay on the sides. We also stay to the back. And that's because despite what you see on TV, CNN, or any of the other like TV channels, you do not need to be right next to where police and protesters are throwing crap at each other. You don't want to be there, because guess what? If you get hit by one of those things, again, you're out of commission, right? Stay to the back, stay to the sides. Situational awareness, always know where there's a doorway you can duck into, where there's a building or a corner you can step around, even if it's as much as getting up a step on a curb to get out of the flow. And honestly, in these types of situations, one of the best places to be is like high, like find a building where somebody will let you go onto the second floor or parking garage or ramp where you can just watch the big crowd. Because listen, when things are that chaotic, you're probably not going to be doing one-on-one interviews with people, right? And you don't really need to. What you need to do is observe what's happening. And one of the best ways to do that is from above, looking down, and you can see way more. my last trip to Minneapolis right before the verdict was read. Well, a few days before the verdict was read, I went to Minneapolis because I had been working on a couple of longer term stories. So we knew that the trial was pretty much starting to wind down, and my bosses and I were like, all right, listen, I'll just go to Minneapolis. I'll go hang out and I'll visit with all these people, do some casual interviews. What do you think happened on the day I arrived back in Minneapolis? Any guess on which day I arrived in Minneapolis? All right, well, there's a reason I'm called Calamity Erin. It's because disaster follows me. So I arrived in Minneapolis, again, a pre-planned trip, the day they shot Dante Wright. So what went from being a planned week of casual interviews with sources I already knew ended up being a week of getting tear gassed in Brooklyn Center and trapped in an apartment building across from the police station as they sent a horde of police officers through to, remove everyone one night. We were trapped in this building for about an hour and a half. We knew it wasn't safe enough to go outside because we could see the police basically beating on people. And we also knew that our press passes probably weren't going to save us from that. So it was me and my colleague, Andrew Rastusha. GSOC was on the phone. We didn't hit our panic buttons, but we're always in contact with them via like WhatsApp or something. Just called to let them know we were stuck. And I just honestly pressed my phone against, it was a glass door, thank God, pressed my phone against the glass and I just took video. And then called my editor or texted my editor. At that point, there were so many people. This is why I say you can't rely on being able to tweet. When so many people flood an area, it stresses the Wi-Fi. And often that Wi-Fi will just go kaput. Or it's been burned down because it's a wildfire or a hurricane. So the cell phone towers have been knocked out. So you can't ever rely on your connectivity. Always have backup. WhatsApp is a really great way to communicate, even if you have very low bandwidth. That's what it's designed to do. So that's why our security teams often use WhatsApp. And like on verdict day, our video teams were like, oh, just take some video and send it in. And I was like, ixnay on the video, because that's not going to happen for hours. Like, you're going to get thousands of people outside of Government Center, and that Wi-Fi is not going to handle it. So, you just you have to be patient, and you have to talk to your editors about what may or may not be possible. This is where I say planning is really important. You have to realize that even if a place doesn't look like a disaster, infrastructure is going to get stretched. And so you need to talk with your editors about, hey, while I'm out here reporting, I might not be able to see all of the emails because I might not have Wi-Fi connectivity. I may be able to get a phone call. I may be able to get a text, but let's think about this beforehand so that once I have all of my fabulous reporting, I can actually get it to you. How does that work, right? Because if you do all this reporting, but then you can't get it back to your editors, what good is it? So I also, in addition to the phones, I carry lots of batteries, number one, to keep the phones going. I have a big battery that has 6 charges on it, and then I keep a bunch of tiny little bricks charged everywhere. And if you can have 2 phones, having one on different cell phone networks, like sometimes Verizon works great and sometimes AT&T works great, and it just depends. Or having a mobile hotspot that is on a different network is really important. I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit all over the place, but I see a couple of questions in the chat. So Two things. Do you come prepared with protective items? Do you see my disaster bunker behind me? So in my car, if most these days I travel a lot by car. My airplane packing game is also pretty good. I try never to put my gear into in a checked bag, because if it gets lost, I'm screwed. So I've gotten really good at, like, if I have to fly to California, packing my fire gear and like a change of clothes into a carry-on. But I carry disaster gear with me almost all of the time. My car has a big Tupperware container in it that is full of N95s, gloves, hand sanitizers, things to throw together, a quick biohazard suit if I need. Obviously that's for COVID. I often travel right now. Those two backpacks are packed. One of them is my gas mask and all of the stuff that goes with the gas mask, so that the helmet and the goggles and everything else to go to a riot. And the bag next to it is packed full of my my protest and riot clothing, which is mostly natural fiber cotton, because if people start throwing things like Molotov cocktails, you don't want it to be synthetic. Let's just put it that way. And also it's just breathable. It's a little bit better than your like athletic gear. And you dress in layers so that, once you get tear gassed, you can like maybe take off a layer, shove it into a bag so it won't infect all of your other clothing, because that stuff gets everywhere. One time we were in Kenosha after Jacob Blake, and the night that Kyle Rittenhouse shot all those people. And we got tear gassed pretty bad. That was a really violent night. And I had like, we got tear gassed, and then like we were trying to make our exit, and I had pulled off my gas mask after we got out of the zone. But like I went to pull my mask, like my just face mask back up, not thinking, just like, oh yeah, we're still in COVID. Let me put but it had been soaked with tear gas. So I put it back on my face, and I totally gassed myself out all over again. So, things like that, live and learn. Don't put on your dirty face mask after you are in a cloud of tear gas. The personal question, I do not mind talking about this at all. Mental health is really, really, really important. I haven't met a reporter yet who can do this work without absorbing the trauma. I think most long-term disaster reporters, trauma reporters, have PTSD, secondary PTSD. It's really important to recognize that you are going to see things and report on things that, as a normal civilian type, you wouldn't, and that are really heartbreaking and can be scary, can cause you anxiety. And so I think first is the realization that this is going to happen, and that you need to be graceful with yourself as the people that you're talking to. Recognize that it takes a lot out of you. One of the best things you can do for yourself in the field on these assignments is drink water. And before you go on any trauma assignment, buy yourself some snacks. Because I guarantee you, you are going to miss like most of your meals, or end up eating at a gas station, which is terrible. Because after a hurricane knocks everything down, the only thing open is a gas station half the time, or the one lone McDonald's or Waffle House. Often when I was in Minneapolis, which has a great food scene, I was still eating at gas stations because I was just too busy trying to track people down to really stop. And that's a conversation also to have with your editor. It's just like how you need time. You need a break. Even in the middle of the action, you need like 30 minutes to an hour to step away make sure you have time to eat, and just like take a breath, take a step back so that you're not on high alert. And, you know, have your friend and family network ready to go. The people that you trust to talk things out, you know, after you've had a crappy day, they're really important. Having somebody that you can talk to, whether it's your parents or a trusted relative or your friend. Like, I often call my friend Elaine, who is she's a reporter for People Magazine. She also covers basically the disaster and trauma beat. And we just we're often on the same assignment, but two, even if we're not, she's just like the shoulder that I like cry on sometimes, or, you know, vent to if I'm stressed out. I have those colleagues. Russell Gold, who I already mentioned, is one of the people that I often turn to when I just need like a friend to listen and like hear how terrible something was. You know, you channel a lot of it when you report it out and then put it into your story, whether it's a written story, a radio story, or a video story, but you still need to process it. So having the people that you talk to, I also have a really great psychologist. Her name's Colleen. I talk to her now once a week because, listen, the pandemic has been really hard. Used to be once a month, now it's once a week. And we just talk this stuff out. And, you know, if you're the type to do physical activity, I think I've mentioned running, I run. I hug my dog, who is currently sat down on the bed over there. And, you know, just, yeah. But I also think once you do a trauma assignment, especially if they're not something that you do all the time, like I could do maybe one or two, but then you got to take a break. You have to take a break. You cannot go forever just covering disaster after disaster. And that's coming from somebody who does cover disaster after disaster. You have to take the moment to find some other type of news, find a happy story, especially find a happy story. We have at the Journal, we have A-heads. I love writing A-heads after a trauma assignment because they remind me that humanity is still good after I've been in a place where humanity isn't always great. I mean, you know, covering George Floyd was tough. It was tough emotionally because, like, listen, I had to watch that video of Floyd. I mean, we did a count of just how much it was watched during the trial, which was more than 100 times. I've watched it way more than that. I had to watch it before anyone in the public had seen it, or, you know, the full like body cam video, everything. And I had to watch it dozens of times to report on it. And there was a point where I had to tell my editor, you know, like I can watch this, but if they show this part or this part during the trial, I can't do it. Can't do this. And like, how many times do I have to watch George Floyd die? You know, for the sake of reporting. So I think knowing where your boundaries are and being okay expressing them, you know, like you just have to advocate for yourself, because, you know, a mental health injury is basically just as bad as a physical injury, in that if you don't take care of your mental health, then you can't do this type of reporting. And if you're not doing it, who is? So I always like to, in a disaster, I definitely like to work in a team. It's not always possible. Our protocol for protests and riots is to work in a team, because honestly, I think those are probably the most dangerous, simply because as a reporter in today's world, like, you can't trust anyone. The police might target you, the protesters might target you, you know. So it's good to have a colleague who can watch your back. And so we often work in tag team on protest and riot assignments. I mean, I've been solo in the aftermath of like wildfires and hurricanes, but again, it's way better. It's always better to work in a team if you can. If it's, you know, if you're the reporter and you have a photographer or a videographer with you, that's often great. But yeah, just someone to like watch your back, be an extra set of eyes, and also be a person you can decompress with at the end of the day. You know, it's like trying to do this solo is really tough. So yeah, just camaraderie is huge. What else can I tell you? Like, again, I feel like I've been a little bit all over the place. I apologize for that. Sort of like my assignments. But what else do you want to know? Have I missed questions in the chat? Are there certain stories you should or shouldn't?
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to ask
Yeah.
that question really quickly because I
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
I think personally, I think that there are stories that you should be allowed to say no to if you don't want to cover them. I don't think anyone should say you can't cover this because you are X or you are Y, right? Like, screw that. And also, pretty sure that's illegal. But so you can't tell by my name. I'm half Mexican. Covering George Floyd was really, really, really tough. Because listen, while I have lots of amazing reporter friends who are people of color and who want to cover things like immigration and race, again, they're not my jam. Those are not, disasters are my jam. Trauma reporting is what I do best. But and as much as George Floyd's death was that trauma situation and was disaster reporting, there was a point where it got really, really, really tiresome and draining to be explaining racism on that level and being asked as the person of color, and not even like, I'm not Black. Like, I can, you know, I can report on the Black experience, but it was really tough for me emotionally to see what was happening to these communities, and then to go report on it, and then to have like this racist backlash just like come back in reader comments, and or even, I mean, even during editing there were some struggles, just because, you know, not everyone understands all of the issues. And so sometimes you are working with editors who you need to explain, like, hey, this is what the experience is. This is why we're using this wording or reporting this way, or this is why we should stay away from X, Y, Z. You know, you might think that this phrasing is innocuous, but it's actually coded language in certain communities. And so, you know, stuff like that. And it was just like, I hit a point, and I want to say, was that March of this year, maybe? There was a point not long after George Floyd died where I hit a point where I was like, I need a break from this. I need to go do something else for a little bit. It's not that I want to be taken off the George Floyd story forever, but I need a second. And I also need to like I don't want to add race and social justice to my already traumatic beat. Like, I'm happy to be the disaster and trauma reporter, but please don't make me the social justice reporter, because I think that will just like do me damage. And I said that to my editor, and she was okay with it. And so for a little while, I went and covered COVID instead. You know, and I feel very connected to George Floyd. It's really hard not to connect with these stories when you like sit down with their roommates, get to know their families and their neighbors. And, you know, like on verdict day, where was I on verdict day? I was sitting with George Floyd's family in their hotel, waiting for the verdict to come. You know, I was in the room with them when they talked to Nancy Pelosi. I was right there when they found out that a verdict had been reached and they needed to go back to the courthouse. Like, it's really hard not to connect. and not to carry these stories with you. And so when you need to step back, it's okay to say that you need to step back, because again, this reporting is it is not like covering the company on Wall Street at all. Those people are media trained, number one. Like all of those people you talk to in corporate America, like they've been told how to correspond with reporters. The people you meet on the disaster beat, if they have media training, like they're few and far between. Ooh, this question, yes. So the question, have you ever run into another reporter from a different news organization who wasn't reporting empathetically? Did you say something? Yes. Okay. Does anyone remember the mass shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas at the First Baptist Church? 26 people. Tiny community, not even counted on the census, right? There were more reporters in Sutherland Springs than there were actual residents. That meant that everything that we did was done in the public view, because this community closed ranks really quick. Very often when you go into a place like this, like once you open up a conversation, somebody might invite you into their personal space, like their home or their yard. In Sutherland Springs, they were so overwhelmed that everything you did was basically on a sidewalk. You never got into those personal spaces. And the very first night, they had a vigil at the post office. So again, this is like a one street town. Like a major highway bisects the place. And so the church was on one side and the post office was across the street. And, media had set up over here, and the post office had a parking lot. And so the community decides to hold a candlelight vigil. And after the vigil, in those moments, I just tend to sort of hang back a little bit and eavesdrop a little bit on just sort of observe people's emotions to try and figure out who is in a frame of mind to be approached. And so I started talking to this lady. I hadn't even pulled out my notepad yet. And, we start talking, and I asked her, do you mind if I take some notes about what you're telling me? She was a member of this church, hadn't gone because it was like the day that daylight savings time happens, and the clock changeover had screwed up her sense of timing. And so she had woken up too late to go to church. So she's telling me oh my God, but for daylight savings time, I would have been in that church when everyone got shot up and all of my friends are dead, and it's terrible. And all of a sudden, this radio reporter comes up, shoves a huge microphone. You've seen the radio microphones, huge microphone in this. How do you feel? And I turned to this reporter. She was young. I don't even remember what outlet. I'm trying to remember. She was young. I would say maybe 20s. And I turned to the lady I was talking to. I said, hold on. And I just turned to this woman and I said, I'm sorry, that's not how you do this. You need to take a step back and just ask this lady's permission. You don't just shove a microphone in someone's face like that after a moment like this. And it actually happened. That happened again after Jacob Blake's shooting. And I was interviewing someone outside of his home who's standing in his yard, and another reporter just came up and started peppering this guy with questions. And again, I turned to the guy and I was like, I'm sorry, have you asked this man's permission? Number one, I was talking to him and you just weren't in on the interview. But two, this guy hasn't yet agreed to share his story with you. Just I don't always speak up, but in those moments, I get very protective of trauma victims. So you need to ask permission. You need to make sure that someone is okay talking to you. And also just professional courtesy. Like, try not to horn in on other people's interviews, unless you're in a media scrum. That's totally different. Have I ever had issues with people not taking this seriously? I get asked all the time if I'm still in high school, which I don't understand. But yes, I have problems all the time with people not taking me seriously. And also, like, I'm a woman, and I hate to say it, but like, you know, I covered the male-dominated energy industry for 10 years, and a lot of disaster response is male-dominated as well. So very often you have your professionals who are just like, look at you, you cute little like girl. And, you know, like, sometimes that works for you because they underestimate you, and you can just be like, gosh darn, I'm gonna like, I'll show you. You know, I mean, listen, it is not beyond me to put on my like damsel in distress. Oh my gosh, men with armed guns. Like, I just want to talk to you. Please don't shoot me. Like, that's actually happened in Kenosha. But, you know, like, you can, I guess, use it to your advantage. But when people are challenging you as media, because I think that's like most often when my credibility gets challenged, it's because I'm a woman and people are like, what are you doing out here, you cute little thing? But there are other times, especially more recently, when people are like, all the media lies, like, blah, 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 blah. Listen, don't engage, walk away. You do not have to, it is not on your shoulders to defend all of journalism. You do not need to prove yourself to someone who isn't going to hear you anyway. Because listen, if they're approaching you like that, they're one of those people who's probably going to wear those t-shirts that says, you know, rope journalist treaty. Like, just get away from them. Walk away. Don't engage. Just like you don't engage with Twitter trolls or, you know, social media trolls. Like just, you don't have to prove yourself. And now it's different. Like, is it an official? If it's an official, it's tougher, right? Like, you know, you've got to play the game a little bit. And I think just be respectful, but don't get into any sort of debate or fight. Just like diffuse and walk away, de-escalate. But if it's like some random Joe Blow who's just like, the media lies, you don't have to talk to that guy. In fact, right after the 3rd precinct burned down in Minneapolis, we were out there. I think I was standing near Omar and the CNN crew, and like this guy just comes up and he starts like, the media, blah, 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 media sucks, like, you guys suck, you tell lies. And like, I looked at the photographer I was working with, her name was Jen. We just looked at each other and we're like, slowly back away. That's it. You know, we got far enough away and we like skedaddled. We let CNN handle that. All right, what else, guys?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can't hear you.
Okay. Hi. So, how is your support system be as
Jada,
far?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
You want to type it in the chat?
Sure.
I can hear you.
Oh.
Can you not hear Erin?
Can't hear me?
She can't hear you for some
Okay.
reason.
I will
Type it in the chat.
Okay.
Erin, can you hear me? Erin? She must have.
Oh, how come I can't? Can I just not hear anyone?
Can you hear me, Erin?
Can't hear any of us.
Oh, I hear barely.
Can you hear? Oh, okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
It was my fault. This thing came out. I was like, what's going on?
No, you're fine. So my question was kind of a little bit personal, but how has your like support system impacted you choosing reporting? I know kind of like what you were just telling with your story, a lot of people don't really trust the media. A lot of people are saying fake news this, fake news that. A lot of people just don't think you're going to make it in this field, stuff like that. So how have you been able to get past that? How has your support system been? And how have you just been motivated to keep doing something you're passionate about?
Well, I think the first thing you should know is that I've wanted to be a journalist since I was 7. So like before that, I wanted to be a fire jumper. So now I guess I kind of have the best of both worlds. So, I mean, I think just one, knowing that this is basically the only thing I ever wanted to do has been helpful for me, but obviously that's not everyone. And I think what really, like, listen, are there some days when I'm like, gosh, we could be doing more, we could be doing better, we could be communicating how important we are somehow to the people in a way that they would understand? Yes. Like, I often think that we could do things to like get people back to the point where they trust us more. I mean, think about it. Like, Superman and Lois Lane, I know these are really funny examples, but Superman and Lois Lane are both journalists. Like, journalists were revered enough at a certain point to be superheroes in comics. Like, you know, we have long been a trusted profession, and right now that is being called into question. But I think that you have to remember that there are always going to be people like that, and that as long as you have faith in yourself and in your reporting and in your organization's reporting, then I think that's what helps get me through. Like, you know, not everyone agrees with, you know, exactly how the Wall Street Journal reports stuff, but at the end of the day, I know that I'm a solid reporter and my colleagues are solid reporters. And so I trust their work and I trust my work. And that's what I come back to all the time. I know who I am as a person. I know that I'm empathetic. I know that I'm out there trying to deliver the best information. And so I really think that it's trust in yourself. And then again, going back to your friends, having those friends who can help pull you back from that doubting edge, you know, and talk things out. Like, there are going to be moments when you misstep, right? Or get something wrong. Like, listen, guys, I've made big mistakes. I had a guy once lie to me, and it got into the paper. A fabulist who lied about being at a mass shooting, being a witness at a mass shooting, and it got past us. And that was a huge blow to my confidence in myself. And, you know, we had to go back and like look at like, how did this guy get through all of our reporting defenses? How did they get past me and everybody else, and learn from that mistake and realize, like, we're human, we're not always going to get it right, you know. We are not infallible. Journalism is not infallible. So I think a little bit of grace too in like listen, brush off the crazies, but if somebody comes to you with a valid criticism of journalism, receive it and see if there's something you can do to help change it, you know. When readers write in and ask me all the time, how come you guys capitalize the word black but not white when talking about race? Well, we actually have a helpful blog post about that is well reasoned and thought out, and I send it to them. But we also, you know, we have our own internal debates about stuff and how we handle stories, how we handle language. You know, for a long time, the journal used the term illegal aliens, like well past when other outlets stopped using it, recognized it as problematic. But finally, because of voices like mine, because of voices like my other colleagues who are, you know, people of color and allies, like they finally were like, you know what, we need to review some of our language and make it better, make sure that we are, you know, cognizant of what these words mean, how those meanings have changed, and even if they were acceptable in the past, maybe they're not now, and we need to always constantly be looking at that. So I think that's how you handle the doubters. Like, recognize that, like, just like everything else, we evolve, and so brush off the nutsos, but like take the constructive criticism where you find it. Ooh, how do you verify someone's experience in telling you the truth? So, it's not always easy. You have to, like, for people who are credentialed, ask to see their credentials. we actually ran into this. It was hard with the guy who lied to me because he said he was a substitute teacher and the school district wasn't answering questions. I eventually got his mom on the phone and his mom lied on his behalf, and that's how he got through us, honestly. Yeah, she was like, yes, my son is the blah, 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 blah. No, he wasn't. So like, it's really hard to protect yourself, you know, against someone who's sophisticated enough that his family's lying for him. But a lot of the time, like, if somebody says, like, you know, before everybody knew what George Floyd looked like if someone says, oh my gosh, I knew George Floyd, well, ask them, oh, describe him for me, like physically. Like, oh, do you have any pictures of you and him together that you could show me? Oh, you say you were a passenger on the Grand Princess. Do you have any vacation photos? Do you have your like reservation confirmation? How about like any letters or, you know, that they put out on the cruise? There's always some sort of trail, right? And honestly, if anyone like hits your gut the wrong way, like just walk away. Again, I've walked away from people who I'm just like, there's something hinky here, like just don't do it. But oftentimes you can ask, like, you know, if you say you're from a place, oh, tell me more about that town, you know, show me pictures. With COVID, especially because you're not talking face to face, like, you know, people were like, oh yes, I had COVID, or, you know, or I went through this experience. Oh, can I see your medical record? And you can tell them, like, listen, I'm not going to publish your medical record without your consent. Like, we would never do that, but I'd like to see it. And honestly, I open up to people, like I tell them, like, listen, one time this guy lied to me and it really sucked. So it's not that I don't trust you. I've just been burned and like my editors now make me do this. Or like, you know what? If you have to ask a tough question, sometimes you can like blame it on an editor. Oh, my editor really wants to know the answer to this. It's a little bit of distance. Doesn't have to be quite true. I don't know if that's kosher to say, Shirley, but I said it. You know, give yourself a little bit of distance from the tough question if you need to. It's okay.
The editors get blamed for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like I'm sorry, I have to ask you this really personal thing, but like my editor really wants to know.
Or the anonymous, the desk, you know.
Yes, 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 yes.
Um,
Especially if you've already gone through the editing process.
Erin had a question, Erin Burnett, about the pandemic. Erin, you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah, hi. So I was just wondering.
Hello, other Erin.
Hello. We've met before. I don't know if you remember. I went to the Northwestern Chair Program and you spoke there too, so I remember you. But
I'm an instructor this year.
Oh, cool. I'm pretty sure we were the last in person.
I think you were. So you've met Lois in person?
Yes, I have. He is adorable. Or she is adorable.
She just wandered into the room.
But how has the pandemic impacted the way you report, and then how has working on pandemic stories like impacted you or been different?
So yeah, so at the start, of course, you know, no one knew how much you could be mobile, right? So a lot of our travel and a lot of the things that I used to do in person, you suddenly couldn't do in person. So like I had to figure out, how do I report on this disaster zone when I can't always be there physically? And it became a lot of interviews like this with Zoom, where at least you can see the person and see their mannerisms and maybe see something about their environment. Like now you guys all know that I have a yarn problem. You know, so you could see like little details like that, even though you weren't physically close. And I think that's probably the biggest way that it impacted things, is you really had to change like how you connected with people, and then how you verified their stories. A lot more asking for documentation, photo, video, paperwork, all of that kind of stuff, because again, you couldn't be with them. Like very often, you know, somebody's in a disaster zone standing in their house that just got knocked down by a hurricane or whatever. And like, you know that that's their house. Like they can show you around, they can point things out. You know, they might even have pictures or whatever. Like you couldn't always do that. So like when I was reporting on the Grand Princess, which was the cruise ship that first had COVID, you know, it was getting people on the phone, getting them on video chat, asking to go through their vacation photos, asking to see their confirmation emails, asking to see the paper, like have them hold up the paperwork that they had from the cruise, all of that kind of stuff. And then when we did start to travel, you know, like I had to get on a plane a couple of times, but now I drive everywhere. Like when I go to Minneapolis, I drive 6.5, 7 hours each way. It's a lot more time in the car. You've got to build that time into your reporting. It's helpful once I'm on the ground because then I just have my car and all my stuff. So I don't have to be as great of a packer. I could just like lob everything I think I might need into the trunk, which is fantastic. But yeah, it was really around this type of stuff, the video reporting, the phone calls, getting better at asking questions that help you set the scene, asking like, and this is a lesson actually I learned from a recorded interview that Amy Tan gave, if you know who she is. So she talks about asking questions that elicit the senses, sense memory. How do things smell? How did they taste? What did it feel like? What did you hear? And again, trying to, since I'm not there standing in the middle of the wildfire zone or, you know, in the middle of the hospital, describe what it looks like to me. You know, what color are the walls? What sound does the floor make when you walk on it? Does it make a sound at all? Like, what do you hear going on around you? Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Thank you.
Lois is very cute. She's named Lois Lane. Her collar says dig until you find it. So I wanted to address how do you first get started? Honestly, raise your hand. Like, listen, may surprise you after talking to me, but not everybody likes to cover disasters, okay? So just raise your hand. If you are interested in covering protests and riots, the next time an assignment comes up, say, hey, can I be assigned to that? Now, you want to be assigned with somebody who can guide you, who can teach you. Like, you don't want to just be thrown into like wildfire reporting immediately, right? Because you won't necessarily know what you're doing. But ask to be put on the story and with someone else if you can get, you know, a veteran reporter. If you can't, call me. Like, I'll walk you through how to pack for a hurricane or pack for a wildfire. There's another guy, his name's Chris Post. He does a lot of disaster reporting. He has a website somewhere. I'll send it around if I can, but he also offers himself up as a resource. Like, if you have been assigned something, even if it's something that you want, but you're not quite sure how to get started or what to pack or like what you might do to prepare yourself, there are reporters out there who will share their experience, figure out who they are in your newsroom, or reach out to someone like me and just say, hey, can you help me? There's a reporter at the Houston Chronicle who right before her first hurricane just reached out and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've heard you might be able to tell me a few things. And I walked her through it. And I did it because honestly, that's how I started. Like, I didn't start knowing everything. Hell, I still don't know everything. I learned something on every single assignment. But like, when I got assigned to Hurricane Katrina, when it was still a Category 1, my friend Rich McKay, who is still my friend, after all of these years, pulled me aside and was like, all right, I know that they only told you to pack for a weekend, but pack for a week. And also go to the grocery store and buy yourself a loaf of bread and some peanut butter and lots of tuna in jars or little packets. This is food that doesn't really spoil. I mean, the bread has a shelf life, but like, listen, peanut butter doesn't really go bad. Doesn't have to be refrigerated. Tuna in those little like slide open pouches. Like, listen, you may not be a fan of tuna, but when you're really hungry, it tastes fantastic. You know, knowing that I needed to get water and a gas can, he was like, you need to find a gas can and you need to take extra gas with you stat because it's going to run out after a major hurricane. Like stuff like that. You're not expected to know it, but the people who have been through this can walk you through it. Yeah. Approaching trauma victims. Again, I think the best way is to put all of your reporting stuff away. I mean, have it, have it easily accessible. But like, I'll tuck my phones into my pockets or my notepad away. Because like, especially like the phone isn't as scary, so maybe I'll have it in my hand, but that notepad is super scary to a lot of people. Those TV cameras are super scary to a lot of people. So if you can, when you approach them, start without that and start as a human being, start as a person. Are you okay? How are you doing? Like, do you need anything? In Paradise, California, after the campfire went through, I was on the fire line with one of the PIOs, and we were driving around, and we were near Paradise Elementary. What was Paradise Elementary? It had been burned to the ground. And as we're driving by, I see this lady in a Paradise school district sweatshirt. It's got like, it was all bedazzled. And she's just crying, and she's all alone, walking down the sidewalk, just like in tears. And I just told the guy I was with, I was like, stop the truck right now, stop the truck. And we'll hop out. Always like, we got to go check on that lady. Like, she's clearly not okay. So it wasn't even as a reporter in that moment. I mean, I was like, you're always kind of hoping like, maybe she'll talk to me. But my first concern was, oh my God, crying lady by herself in the middle of a burned out town. So we go up, her name's Michelle. And Michelle is the superintendent of the Paradise School District. And Paradise Elementary just happened to be the first school that she was ever a principal at. And so I walked up and I said, are you okay? You're out here by yourself, you're crying. She tells me who she is. And I said, do you need a hug? This was before COVID. Do you need a hug? And so she was like, yes, please. And so I hugged her. And she, afterwards, she was just like, thank you. Like, she had some tissue, thankfully, because I didn't. And I really need to put that in the go bag. I said, listen, Michelle, like, you can totally tell me to bugger off. I often tell people, like, you can just tell me to go away, okay? But I'm a reporter. Here's what I'm here to do. Would you mind talking to me if I wrote some of this down? And I often start with, you can just tell me to go away. Because if they're not in the mood to talk to you, then then skedaddle, get out of there. Leave that person alone. But she said yes. And I ended up talking to her, and it was heartbreaking. And it was exactly what we needed to tell a story that was going to pull people in and really make them feel the loss of this town. And I ended up talking with Michelle and her husband, Phil, for the next year. I got introduced to Phil separately. I didn't even know they were married at the time, because he was the fire safe council guy, the local guy who is all into fire safety and helps other people be into fire safety. And I ended up talking to them for the next year in writing a massive story about the aftermath of this fire and trying to rebuild this town. And it's basically all because we stopped the truck and I hugged Michelle. Yeah. Sadly, Phil died. But yeah, he died during the reporting of the larger story. I think the stress, he was really stressed out. Like he felt like he had failed his town because while he wasn't a firefighter, like he was the guy who, tried to get everybody to care about fire safety. And after the town burned down, he just I think it was really hard on him, and he ended up having a heart attack. Yeah.
All right, we have a few hands. Hardika?
Yeah.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
My question is about kind of like how to balance objectivity while expressing empathy for a lot of these like survivors and victims, especially since we've been having a lot of these ethics conversation. So, for example, in this scenario, like you're at a place where gun shooting took place, and you're asking victims like, what was that experience like? Do you think like guns should be allowed or not allowed? Oh yeah, it's terrible that these many shootings are happening every year. How do you balance that?
I mean, I think you have to be human, right? Like you can't do this type of reporting and completely shut yourself off. And if you can, you shouldn't be doing this type of reporting because you really do need to be able to absorb the emotion. Now you've got to maintain the line of of professionalism. I won't necessarily call it objectivity because that's such a subjective word anyway. But you need to be professional. You need to know that like when you're talking to regular people like Michelle, I mean, she is, she's a school official to some extent. So like, there's a little bit of that in there, but like really mostly she's just a regular resident of this town. And so I can approach her as that regular resident. And there's a lot more leeway there to be, nice and personable. I mean, these are people that I've had dinner with who have invited me into their homes. I watched one person, I helped one person move into their new house because I was there observing it. Like, what kind of jerk are you to just be like, I'm just gonna watch everything, like, from my 10 steps away. Like at a certain point, like you've been invited into these people's lives, you participate in them to a certain extent, but you always remember, these are not your personal friends, right? You can be friendly without being friends. And then it's different in like politically or racially charged situations. Like if you are covering something like a protest, you cannot be out there holding a sign with the protesters, right? And you also cannot be on your personal time out there with the protesters. Like if you are going to be a journalist covering these events, you need to stay away from them in your personal life to whatever extent that your newsroom's policies dictate that. Now, obviously, we all have our personal experiences. So like somebody cannot tell me you can't be Mexican because you're going to cover blah, blah, blah. Like, no. But you do have to remember that you are a journalist and we have ethics. And, depending on what our individual newsrooms say, like, we have very specific guidelines to follow, like don't accept gifts. In protests, we talk about don't spend too much time talking to either the police or the protesters. Set yourself apart a little bit. And when you're going to a protest, don't dress all in black. You'll look like Antifa. But like do things to maintain a certain amount of distance when you need to. Don't take food or water or aid from either side in a protest, because like it's really about protecting yourself. If the police see you taking food and like joking around with the protesters, when the tear gas starts flying later in the day, like they might think you're one of the protesters. Or if the protesters see you talking with the police in too friendly of a manner, again, when the frozen water bottles start flying, like they might come your way because they might think, oh, she's a police sympathizer. So like you've got to be cognizant of those types of things, right? In those charged moments. But honestly, with trauma victims, I think you just need to, have your humanity at the forefront. And, obviously verify everything. Don't just take anything they say as the absolute truth, but, verify it. But a lady after the night of the Sutherland Spring shooting at that candlelight vigil, one of the ladies that I approached who told me that she didn't want to talk. I had seen her, I had approached her, she told me no. I said, thank you, I'm really sorry about what happened, and I walked away. But I had given her my business card. She emailed me several weeks later. She just said, Erin, I wanted to thank you for being a nice reporter out there. She's like, I don't generally trust reporters, and but you were a nice person. When I told you I didn't want to talk, you respected that. And she ended her email with something that I actually keep on a sign at my desk. And she said, keep your heart ahead of your head. And in trauma assignments, I think you need to keep your heart ahead of your head.
Erin? Burnett, I'm sorry.
Yes. I was just wondering, what's the biggest life lesson you have learned through all of this experience in reporting for you?
Ooh, I mean, there are a lot of, I don't know if I can narrow it down to just one. The thing that I think about a lot is that, I'm not just a reporter. I am also I won't say victim, I'll say survivor of some of these traumas. And I think that's the thing to remember, because it helps you relate, is that we are not just reporters sitting in our ivory tower typing up, or splicing together video and audio. Like, we experience these things right alongside these people, and sometimes they affect us personally. And that's one of the things that guides me as I go through each of these stories. When the October 2017 wildfires, well, we'll even start before that. When Harvey hit Houston, I lived in Houston. My neighborhood flooded. I couldn't go home for days. I had to stay in a hotel with my other colleagues. I wasn't even for a while, I wasn't even sure what my house looked like, if it had any damage. And, so I was experiencing that as everybody else was. Then Hurricane Irma came the next month, and Irma hit where my dad lives. And then my bosses were like, hey, Erin, we know that you covered Harvey and Irma back to back. And I was a total wreck as we waited for Irma to land, because I didn't know if she was going to go directly over my dad's house. He refused to get out of the way. And I was like, which one of us has lived through a Category 5 hurricane? Me, get out of there. And we got into a huge fight. I'm reporting on it and fighting with my dad at the same time, trying to get him to leave. After those two hurricanes, my bosses were like, Erin, you need some R&R. You will not cover Maria. Go home. I went home, October 2017. Wildfires ripped through the town that my mom and sister live in. I ended up covering that as I packed them up and helped them evacuate. And then I went to work. I think that's of all of the life lessons, it's that you are not removed from the thing that you are covering, even if it's not in the place that you live, even if it's not affecting your relatives. Although a lot of my stories, like Paradise, I have cousins who live in the next town over, Chico. They know people who live in Paradise. I had personal requests from people, can you can get behind the fire line and we can't, can you please go check on my house? So yeah. I think that goes back to that other lesson, keep your heart ahead of your head. You are not removed from the things that you are covering. You are in them. And just listen, you guys, we are all survivors of this pandemic. And we are also reporters of the pandemic.
Okay, we got a couple minutes. Sloan, and then Julia.
All right. Wow, this has been really powerful. Oh, wow. My question is, so when I was a breaking news reporter, one of the stories I always remember doing is covering a Christmas Day fire and then a funeral of the family who basically died. It was two boys, and the mother, I had to interview the mother who was just sobbing. Like, I was at the funeral, and it really, like, that's something that sticks with you. And something I learned from that was how much of an art form covering these events are, how delicate you have to be, and that it's, you have to prime your canvas, sketch it, then color it. And my question is, how do you pre-plan for these events? What are the questions that you're asking yourself? And do you often find that the story you planned is not the story you filed?
It's almost never the story I planned. I mean, and I guess it also depends on where you are in the disaster process, right? Like, are you in the middle of the disaster as it's happening? Or are you in the immediate aftermath, or are you in the recovery? Because it all changes sort of how you pre-plan and how you approach. I mean, when I'm going into something that is active, like a fire, the first questions are always the risk assessment of, like, can I do this safely? And then what does that safety look like? And what can I do ahead of time to get some questions answered? So before I go into something active, like before I drove straight into Hurricane Florence, which took hours, by the way, like, I was like, okay, let me figure out who is the local police chief and PIO, who are all of the local PIOs, from the mayor's office to the police chief to the fire department, to who are is the Salvation Army or the Red Cross going to be out there? I already know people in that network. Let me mobilize them, see if they can connect me with their teams. Do all of that. Like, who are the officials that I can tap ahead of time, or at least have a phone number for, or like have them in my Twitter feed or whatever? And can I ask one of my colleagues to stay on them, to like monitor press conferences and all of that? And then once you're on the ground, can people help guide you to like the worst affected areas, or to where the survivors are? It's often at shelters, that kind of thing. So like doing a lot of that. In the aftermath, it's very similar, but some of these disasters have like a structure to them. Like, wildfires almost always occur, like the fire itself is one thing, but the structure of the response is the same. So, and a little bit with like mass shootings too. So there's probably going to be like a press conference or some sort of official meeting. Can you get to that? Who are the officials that you need to talk to? Can they lead you to those survivors? And once you start talking to your various survivors, can they lead you places? With the protests and George Floyd, it was like, let me reach out to the local BLM chapters, the NAACP. Are there, like, I got on the ground and I called some other reporter friends who work locally in the area, and I was like, tell me who your local activists are, and would you mind sharing their phone numbers with me? You guys, like, all of you now all know each other, right? Like, you are in this class together. You are all going to end up in different newsrooms. Some of you may end up as colleagues, but don't forget that you can like call each other up and be like, hey, Erin, hey, Jada, like remember me from so-and-so? Like, hey, I'm about to come into your town or your area. You think you might be able to help me out? Like, in Hurricane Katrina, I called my college friend who lived there, Susan Dacre, and she gave me some contacts. Same in Minneapolis with George Floyd. I called my friend Ricardo, who works in Minneapolis, and I said, hey, I'm rolling in solo. You look like you're covering this solo. Do you want to team up? Like, let's do this together so that we are not, so that we've got each other's backs. So there's a lot of that you can do. In like once you're in like the aftermath and the recovery, a lot of times what you can do is like mine some of the local coverage to see who the players are and then reach out to them. Churches are a great way to connect with people. Churches and community groups are a really great way to connect with people, and everybody that you talk to too, especially if you connect with them, will lead you to somebody else. You know, especially if they like you as a reporter. I mean, Michelle, the superintendent that I mentioned, she introduced me to so many people, and without her and Phil, like that story wouldn't have happened. So, you know, there's a lot you can do to sort of prep, and then just in the middle of it, remember that everybody that you talk to is a resource. At the end of every interview, I like to ask people two things. Is there something that I didn't ask you that you want to say? Tell me what it is. There's always something. And who else should I talk to? Could you introduce me?
That's good. We have one more question, and I know we're running over a little bit.
I got nothing else to do. So as long as you guys have time, I have time.
All right. Some of the programs may have something else scheduled, but Julia, go ahead. You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I was wondering, because it's so important to be empathetic and to ask people's permission before you speak to them, what are some strategies you use to actually to make sure that you do get the sources that you need before you leave the area that you're reporting on?
Well, let me mention one thing since you brought up the consent again. Remember that emotions change during your conversation, number one. So you need to ask for consent multiple times, not just at the beginning. I often ask people at the end too, or even in the middle, like, how are we feeling? Are you doing okay? Do you need a break? It gives them time to recalibrate. But then at the end too, you know, are you still feeling okay? You know, because sometimes people will tell you stuff and not realize that they're not ready to have, you know, everything that they've blurted out on the record. And again, most of the time this works in your favor. Very rarely do people like take something off of the record. It allows them to open up more. But again, so going back to how do you prepare? Let me ask you this. Are you asking how do I prepare for an emotional interview, or how do I prepare for an assignment overall?
I'm kind of thinking like you're kind of on scene, and then you don't really know who's going to talk to you, and it's really important to like respect these people's boundaries. So how do you like make sure that you do get people?
You just like it's the man on the street lesson. You just start approaching. You got to start somewhere, as uncomfortable as it is. You know, I always tell myself this when we're looking for someone. Like say after a mass shooting and you've got to find like, you know, the families of the victims once you have the names, we get these long lists of possible telephone numbers for these people. And like, I have so much anxiety over cold calling people. I just tell myself, you got to do it. It's like, somebody's going to make this phone call. It might as well be you because you're nice. And I tell myself the same thing whenever I have to approach someone in a disaster zone. I mean, one, you're reading their body language, right? At least you should be. So read their body language. If someone, like if you're approaching and someone is actively moving away from you, pick somebody else. I like to like, seated people are great. They can't move as fast. So if someone's sitting down, unless they're having a really like emotional moment, like I'll, you know, wander up and just be like, hey, I'm Erin, like I'm a reporter. Come in very soft, try to be unassuming, don't talk in too loud of a voice, like slow it down a little bit. Because again, remember, most of these people will also be skittish. So really it's just about softening your approach, moving slowly, and just asking. And if they say no, just move on. Like you're gonna get somebody. You will get, I promise you, there is no time that you will walk into a disaster zone and walk out not having talked to anyone. Now, will you get the absolute perfect, amazing person every single time? No, but you're gonna get somebody. And you just have to be like, you've got to put away any anxiety over approaching strangers and just do it. Just do it. And also remember that not everything you report is an interview. You also have your observations, like, what does this block look like? Can you tell what it looked like before if you go to Google Maps? Or look at census data, like build that contrasting picture too. So it's not just like, just because you don't immediately happen on somebody doesn't mean you can't report. You can tell your editors what a place looks like. Before I met Michelle in Paradise, we had actually driven past the elementary school once before, and I had immediately phoned in description of what this burned out elementary school looked like, how there were pieces of still burning paper fluttering around on the ground, and like how the basketball hoop had like just bent over from the heat, and how there was still one red bike among all of the black ash. There was this bright red bike that was untouched. You know, you have things to say even if you haven't talked to somebody, just based on your observations, but you're always going to get somebody. And it's just a matter of asking. You just have to ask. And if they say no, move on to the next person.
Gemma.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry if you already touched on this and I missed it, but I was just curious, given that trauma can sometimes affect people's memories, I guess I was curious if you have a way to kind of report around memories just to verify them if they're incorrect, like through no fault of the person's own.
Yeah. So this is, it's harder to do. It's harder to do, obviously, like in the middle of the immediate event, right? But it's all about repeating the question. Asking the same questions a few times, whether you're working on a long-term story or the short term. So, you know, don't ask them all lumped together, but, you know, circle back in your conversation. Hey, you said this. Can we just go over it again? Because you're right. People do have faulty memories. And it doesn't mean that they're lying or trying to be untruthful. But, you know, they've just been through this traumatic event. So just go back with them over their memories, particularly the stuff that you want to use. When I do these stories, no matter what, I always make time to go back over a story with someone, even if it's like crunch time and like my editor is like, file now, like call your, and I prep them by telling them, hey, I'm going to call you back, or I'm going to come back and visit you. We are going to talk again because I want to make sure that I don't screw this up. I want to make sure that we get these details right. That preps them to answer the phone or the door or talk to you. It means that, like, you're telling them we are going to have more than one conversation. And then remember, these people are not your only source. So if they're telling you that, like, you know, the school looks this way or this building looks this way, well, can you go online and see, like, what did that house look like before it burned down? What did that school look like? Where's, like, a lot of schools have their layouts online, like a map of their campus and sometimes even their buildings. So, like, you can verify if somebody, you know, is describing a certain area, does it actually look that way? There are, you know, so there are some things that you can do to verify details that people tell you that are, you know, if they're describing a place or, you know, like a historical moment. And you can also, like, ask other, you know, if you're talking to more than one person, ask other people, did it really happen this way? Like, you know, in Sutherland Springs, I talked to several people who were in that church. Like, what did it actually look like? Did it, you know, does this match what you saw? Or tell me what you saw, and then I'll see if those two versions that I've now heard match up. Do they, or do they conflict? So, but really, for the more personal stuff, it's just, you know, hey, I know earlier in the conversation we went over this one moment. Can you just describe it to me again? I think I might have missed something, and see, does the recounting match? And if it doesn't, again, doesn't mean it's a lie, but like delve into it then.
Jada?
This kind of is a question in regards to what you were just saying. What if they get offended, like the person you're interviewing gets offended by you trying to clarify what they're saying, or they feel as though you think they're lying? How do you like try to avoid that? Because obviously you want them to know that you think they're credible, but you're just trying to do your job, but not saying I'm just doing my job.
Oh yeah, I don't, so I've never actually had anyone be like, why, like most of the time you're tactful enough with your questions that it's not necessarily obvious that you're like circling back for any specific reason, other than like, very often I'll be like, oh, I think I might have missed something, or I just want to make sure that I could read my scribble correctly if I'm using a notepad, like, and I show them my crappy handwriting. Here's what my notepad looks like. Can we go back over this so I make sure I got it right? You don't ever have to say like, I'm not sure you're remembering that right. But I think too, what you really have to do is just be open about what the reporting involves. And say, listen, like, I'm going to ask you, like, very often I give people who are just, lay people without any media training sort of a little talk if there's time, where I'm like, hey, listen, like, again, I can ask the question, you don't have to answer it. I'm going to ask you some things that may be uncomfortable. Tell me if they make you uncomfortable, or if you don't want to answer them, or if you don't understand why I'm asking something. Like I could tell them, I might ask some establishing questions or some questions to like help me set the scene. So they may seem silly, but they're like, I'm asking like, I want to know what something sounds like or smells like, just so to help me build that picture. And then again, so like, I'm going to ask you all these questions. Then I'm going to go write my story, and I'm going to write it up. And then I'm going to call you back because I want to check and make sure that I didn't screw up some detail. And I want, I tell them, like, I want to make sure I don't accidentally misspell your name, even though I've already asked you it 5 times. Like, I just want to make sure. So I'm going to call you. And, if you pick up the phone, we can go over, like, I can't read it to you word for word, but we can go over the substance, and I can tell you what I'm using from our conversation. That way, like, and if there is something that like I have screwed up, and I always put it on myself, if there's something that I've screwed up, you can help me fix it before we ever put it in print. But again, that means that when I call you, you have to pick up the phone. And I'm already going to apologize now because my editors always wait until the last second to edit something. So I'm probably going to call you at like dinner time. And I'm sorry, but I'll try and make it only take 2 minutes. Or like, I might have to call you more than once because like 3 editors are going to go over this and they're all going to have different questions and they're not going to tell me at the same time. And I'm sorry that I'm a pain in the ass, but can you help me get your story right? Prime them. They have no idea what journalism actually looks like or how it works or how edits will go until like 10 p.m. Tell them, be open, let them know what a pain in the ass you're going to be. And especially if like you're a nice person, which I know you all are, they're going to be like, I'm going to help you out. Cool. And also, I'm going to help you because you seem like you really want to get my story right. You want to be correct. And you're being so nice. So like, yes, I will answer that phone. And that does 2 things. One, then you end up with your phone number. So a year later, when you're doing the aftermath story, like the recovery story, you can call them back. But, so it allows you to get their number and create those relationships. And some of them end up being long-term relationships. Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, just getting them to answer the phone.
Yeah, I think they probably got notebooks full now from all of the great information you provided.
I still do use them sometimes, not in fast-moving situations.
Well, I really appreciate how generous you have been with your time and with your knowledge. And I'm sure all the students got your email so they can reach out to you when they have those questions or where they get those assignments.
It's my first initial, or sorry, my first name, period, last name at WSJ.com for anyone who doesn't have it. And seriously, if you have a question that you didn't ask here and you want to ask me via email or whatever, please feel free. And if you have a disaster assignment now or in the future and you're just like, I don't know what the hell to do, feel free to reach out. But remember to put in your subject line how we know each other. Otherwise, I might think you're spam.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys, for your patience, for hanging in there. I know we went over a little today, but it seemed like you had endless questions. And so I appreciate that. And take care. For those of you who are finishing up your sessions today or tomorrow, congratulations. And we'll be in touch soon about some of the summer speaker series events.
Very cool.
All right. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Erin.
Of course.